Hi guys, and welcome to Anunnaki Sanctuaries channel. If you're new here, you don't need to know anything in advance. Just breathe and let the names arrive slowly. Tonight, we'll meet Enki in 7 quiet pieces. His symbols, his waters, his temples, and the stories people repeated like a lullaby over thousands of years. Tonight, we drift down to a riverbank older than most of your worries, where the air feels cool and wet and the darkness smells like reeds and silt. You can almost hear the water talking to itself, that steady hush that makes your shoulders loosen before you even realize you are tense. And yes, you're about to meet Enki, a god who loves water, secrets, and solutions, which is basically the holy trinity of staying unbothered. But quick reality check. If you march into Mesopotamian mythology expecting everything to behave nicely, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and your local time in the comments, because I love picturing the story rippling out across the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing near the edge of an ancient city, not the kind with neon and scooter chaos, but one built low and wide, with mud brick walls that hold the day's heat like a warm stone. The sky is bruised purple, the horizon thin and flat, and the river is the loudest thing in the landscape. Water is everything here. It is drink, it is crops, it is trade, it is survival, and it is also the quickest way for your whole week to collapse if it misbehaves. So it makes a weird kind of perfect sense that one of the most beloved gods in this world is tied to sweet water, wisdom, and the sort of calm competence you wish you had in group projects. This is where Enki steps in, quietly, like someone who already knows the answer and does not need to raise their voice about it. In the oldest Sumerian tradition, Enki is a major deity associated with fresh water, knowledge, magic, crafts, and clever problem-solving. A mainstream historical fact, the one you can hold in your hand like a smooth pebble, is that Enki is worshipped in ancient Mesopotamia and appears in Sumerian cuneiform texts, those wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay that survive longer than most modern passwords. And his cult center is famously tied to Eridu, a city that later Mesopotamians treat like it has first city energy, the place where civilization starts to feel official. You walk closer to a small shrine by a canal, and you notice how the water is not just scenery, it is sacred infrastructure. The Mesopotamian world splits water into categories the way you split your phone storage into folders, except their folders are life-giving and destroy everything. There is the salty sea, there are the great rivers, and there is the sweet underground freshwater deep called the Absu. In many myths, Enki's home is connected to this Absu, a hidden reservoir beneath the earth, cool and steady, like the planet's own breathing. You do not have to be a mystic to appreciate the poetry of it. The water below supports the life above. It is a calm foundation, unseen, but absolutely doing the work. You kneel, you dip your fingers in, and for a second you get it. Why Enki feels so different from thunder gods who kick down doors and demand applause. Enki's power is subtle. He is the one who knows where the water runs, where it pools, where it can be guided. And knowledge in this world is not a hobby. It is survival with better handwriting. Priests, scribes, and craftsmen all orbit the idea that wisdom is a force you can build with. Like bricks. Enki becomes the divine version of that feeling when you finally fix something that has been annoying you for days, and you do not even brag. You just enjoy the silence, You pass a scribe's workshop and hear the soft scrape of a stylus on clay. The tablets stack in neat piles, little rectangles of wet earth turning into memory. Honestly, they look like ancient USB drives. Except the download speed is press triangle shapes patiently and hope nobody drops it. This is the environment that makes Enki make sense. He is not only water, he is also the mind that organizes water into canals, schedules, rituals, and recipes. He is the patron energy of figuring it out. And yet, because this is mythology, nothing stays perfectly tidy. Enki is calm, sure, but he is not boring. He can be playful, sometimes mischievous, sometimes so clever it feels like he is cheating, in the way that only a god can cheat and still be called helpful. You notice people speak his name with a certain fondness, like they are talking about the one adult in the room who can de-escalate a family argument without flipping the table. Which is impressive, because divine families are basically group chats with lightning. Here is where the beginner guide part settles in. You do not need to memorize every genealogy and every poem tonight. You just need a few calm facts that let Enki become a shape in your mind instead of a foggy name. Fact 1. In the Sumerian tradition, Enki is strongly linked to fresh water and wisdom, and he often acts as a benevolent counselor. Fact 2. His mythic domain includes the Abzu, an underground freshwater realm, which makes him feel grounded and foundational rather than distant. Fact 3. He has deep ties to Eridu, a city associated with early civilization and ancient prestige. You let these facts sit like stones in your palm, simple and weighty, not rushing you. Now, you also brush against something more slippery, because every famous ancient god attracts modern reinterpretations like moths to a lamp, a quirky fringe tidbit, and we will handle it gently like a sleeping cat. Is that some modern esoteric communities and internet storytellers connect Enki to extraterrestrial narratives, especially through later reimaginings of Anunnaki lore. In those retellings, Enki becomes a cosmic engineer or a rebellious benefactor. It is not how mainstream historians read the ancient texts, but it is part of Enki's modern afterlife, and it explains why his name pops up in places you did not expect, like a surprise cameo in your recommended videos. As you keep walking, you notice how the city's temples are not just religious buildings, they are political and economic anchors. They manage grain, labor, land, and legitimacy. This is where the scholarly fog rolls in, soft and gray. Historians still argue whether Enki's shifting prominence across periods reflects theological evolution, local city politics, or the influence of priestly networks competing for cultural authority. In other words, is Enki becoming more or less central because people's beliefs changed, or because the power map changed, or because both are tangled together like reeds in a net? You do not have to solve it tonight. You just have to feel that it is complicated in a human way. Because humans are always involved, even when they are talking about gods. The river breathes beside you, and you start to sense the tone of Enki stories. They are not all gentle, but many are about rescue, cleverness, and preventing disaster from becoming total. That mood is why he is a perfect guide for a calm beginner's approach. You are not here to be overwhelmed by 1,000 names. You are here to let one figure become familiar, like learning the sound of a new city at night. Footsteps, water, distant voices. The occasional goat bleating like it is personally offended by history. You pause. You look back toward the temple lights, and you let Enki resolve into a simple presence, a god of sweet water and deep wisdom, close to the practical needs of daily life, powerful without always being loud about it. the kind of divine energy that does not just smash problems, but reroutes them, negotiates them, and sometimes tricks them into behaving. And as you turn forward again, the canal glinting like a dark ribbon, you can feel the next layer waiting. Symbols, stories, the strange and beautiful logic of a world built on clay and water. You keep moving, not with the awkward new chapter energy, but with that smooth midnight stroll feeling. Like you are following the river because it is the only thing in the landscape that never lies to you. The air stays cool, the mud brick stays warm, and the city sounds soften into a sleepy murmur. Somewhere behind a wall, someone laughs once, short and tired, and you imagine them looking at the stars like they are checking if the universe has any updates. Spoiler, it does not. It just keeps being the universe. Very consistent brand. As you walk, Enki's presence starts to feel less like a single statue and more like a whole vocabulary. In this world, gods are not just people with powers. They are networks of symbols, titles, ritual roles, and local traditions stitched together across centuries. So you begin where any sensible beginner begins, with the name itself. Because names in Mesopotamia are like passwords, except they can also bless a canal. Enki's Sumerian name, Enki, is often understood as something like Lord of the Earth, and right away you feel the little mental wobble. Wait, Lord of the Earth? I thought we were doing water tonight. Yeah, welcome to mythology, where job descriptions are more like vibes. The earth here is not just dirt. It is the living ground that holds water, the place where sweet water rises up and makes fields possible. Enki's Earth Lord title pairs neatly with his watery realm because the earth without water is just a sad, crunchy snack for goats. And goats, as you have already sensed, are not here to be subtle, a mainstream historical fact to anchor you. Across Mesopotamian cultures, Enki becomes closely identified with a later Akkadian and Babylonian deity name, E. Scholars treat Ea as the Akkadian counterpart to the Sumerian Enki, with overlapping roles in wisdom, water, and magical expertise. This matters because when you read myths, you will see names shift depending on language and era, like a celebrity who changes their stage name but keeps the same face. So Enki and Ea are often different labels for a similar divine figure, filtered through different cultural lenses. Now you reach a courtyard where a small relief carving catches the lamplight. It is not huge, but it is detailed enough to make you lean in. You see streams of water pouring from a figure's shoulders or from a vessel, curling down like twin ribbons. Sometimes fish appear in those streams, as if the water is so alive it carries its own proof. This watery iconography is one of Enki's signature visual calling cards. The image says, without words, freshwater abundance. And also, please do not mess this up. We all live here. And then you notice something else. The symbol that keeps showing up in later Mesopotamian art and thought, connected to Ea, is the goat fish. Yes, you heard that correctly. A goatfish. Like someone combined two animals because they could not decide which one had more chaotic energy. The creature is often linked to the constellation Capricorn in later traditions. But in Mesopotamian religious imagery, it functions as a symbol associated with Ea's watery domain. If you are picturing a majestic chimera and getting disappointed, do not worry. Ancient art can make it look either deeply sacred or like a doodle you drew while bored in class. Both interpretations are valid. This is your first sleepy joke for this section. If you ever feel like your personal brand is confusing, just remember there was once a god represented by a goat that is also a fish. Nobody questioned it for centuries. You drift through the courtyard, and your mind starts sorting Enki's identity kit into calm beginner pieces. Enki's symbol language is watery, flowing streams, vessels, fish, reeds. Even when you do not see him directly, you see what he controls. 2. His titles point to authority, but not the kind that shouts. More like the authority of the person who knows where the water gate is and how to open it at the right time. 3. His later name Ea reminds you that myths travel across languages, and the same figure can wear different names depending on who is telling the story. And now, because you're walking through a living city, you start hearing the way people talk about him in everyday terms. Not grand speeches, but practical phrases. A craftsman mutters a short prayer before sealing a jar. A healer ties a knot and whispers words that sound like they have been said the same way for generations. Enki's domain includes magic and incantations in many texts, which makes him a patron of ritual knowledge. In Mesopotamia, magic is not Halloween decoration. It is an organized system of protective and medical practices. The kind of thing you want on your side when the world is full of unseen dangers and your medicine cabinet is basically herbs and hope. Here is a quirky tidbit that sits just off the mainstream path. Some scholars and enthusiasts point out that Enki's association with cleverness, crafts, and hidden knowledge makes him feel, to modern readers, like a proto-scientific deity, a divine patron of technique and problem-solving. That does not mean Mesopotamians were doing modern science in lab coats. Obviously, it means that in their cultural imagination, there is a sacred respect for know-how, the kind of knowledge that works. Enki becomes the god you picture hovering behind inventions, behind clever fixes, behind the quiet satisfaction of a plan that actually holds. You stop near a basin of water set into stone. Someone has placed a small offering nearby. Maybe bread, maybe dates. You do not touch it. You just watch the water surface tremble slightly. And you think about how symbolic systems work. You are not just seeing decoration. You are seeing a whole theology compressed into images. Water flowing from the gourd. Water held in vessels. Hybrid creatures that blur boundaries, all pointing to an idea. Life is fragile, but wisdom can guide it. And this is where the open debate slides in, soft as a shawl. Historians still argue whether the goatfish and other symbols originally had a tight, consistent meaning, or whether their significance evolved over time as different cities and priesthoods emphasized different aspects of Enki or Ea. Did the symbol start as purely watery, then gather astral associations later? Or were these links already there, just expressed differently? The evidence comes from scattered texts, seals, and artworks across long stretches of time. It is like trying to reconstruct a song from a handful of humming recordings. Hey, you can do it. But you will always wonder what the full chorus sounded like. You keep walking and notice how the night air smells faintly of bitumen and bread. In the distance, a canal gate creaks, and it sounds almost like a sigh. You imagine Enki's presence in that sound, because his mythology is full of boundaries and thresholds, between fresh water and salt, between chaos and order, between human need and divine decree. His symbols are not just pretty. They are a map of the places where life could tip one way or another. Second sleepy joke, gentle and harmless. You realize if Enki were around today, he would absolutely be the guy who fixes your Wi-Fi without making you feel dumb. But he would also label your router Abzu just to be dramatic. And honestly, you would let him. By now, sight Enki is not just a name. He has a look, a feel, a motif. You can recognize his signature, even if you do not see him. It is water that behaves intelligently. It is the idea that knowledge flows, that it can nourish, that it can also drown you if handled carelessly. You start to sense why he becomes the calm mind in so many stories. He is the god of solutions. But solutions come from understanding systems, and he, more than most, is a system god. You glance up at the stars, and you feel the night widen. Enki's symbols, especially those that later tie into constellations and astral thinking, hint at a universe where divine order is written not only on clay tablets but also in the sky. Still, you keep your feet on the ground, because this is Mesopotamia, and the ground is where the water reminds you who is in charge. You step forward again, letting the courtyard fade behind you. The next place you are headed is deeper, quieter, and strangely comforting. You're about to go down, not into danger, but into concept, the Abzu itself, the sweet waters below that make everything above possible. And you can already feel how Enki's calm is not just personality, it is geography. You follow the canal until the streets thin out, and the city becomes more like a suggestion than a structure. The lamps are fewer, the voices are softer. The night air feels heavier, like it is holding its breath, and you start to notice something calming and slightly eerie. Even when everything goes quiet, you can still hear water. It is not dramatic, not crashing, just persistent, like a low whisper under the world. If you have ever tried to fall asleep while a faucet drips in the next room, you know the feeling. Except this drip is ancient, sacred, and somehow less annoying. You stop where the canal widens into a pool that reflects the stars in a broken pattern. The surface looks like dark glass. You lean closer, and the idea of the Abzu comes back, not as a vocabulary word, but as a sensation. The Abzu is the freshwater deep, an underground reservoir in Mesopotamian thought, the sweet water beneath the earth that feeds springs and wells. It is not the salty, untamable sea. It is drinkable water, the kind that keeps goats alive and keeps grain from giving up. Enki's home is tied to this realm, and in many stories he is its lord, which makes him feel like the god of the hidden support system, the quiet utility layer of existence, a mainstream historical fact you can hold on to. Mesopotamian temples and ritual spaces often place strong emphasis on water for purification and sacred practice. Water is not only practical, it is a ritual tool, a cleanser, a boundary marker between ordinary life and sacred time. Enki's connection to the Abzu means he is tied into this whole culture of cleansing, blessing, and maintaining order. And yes, that order includes the order of your thoughts. You can almost feel your brain slowing down, like it is stepping into cooler shade. Now, as a beginner, you might wonder, why build a whole mythic realm for groundwater? It sounds like the least glamorous supernatural property listing ever. Welcome to my underground freshwater bunker, but in a land where drought can kill and flood can erase. Water is the most dramatic thing you can imagine. The Abzu is security. It is stability. It is the promise that even when the surface is harsh, there is something steady below. That is the core of Enki's calm. You picture it, not like a cartoon cave, but like a vast, cool silence under the earth. Layers of clay, hidden channels, water that moves slowly, not in a rush, but in a patient seep. You cannot see it, but you can feel its influence. Every well, every spring, every reed bed is like a little doorway to that deep. Enki's realm, then, is not far away in the sky. It is beneath your feet, close enough that you could almost knock and ask politely for a refill. This closeness matters. Many gods in mythology feel distant, like they live on mountaintops or in thunderclouds. Enki is different. He is immanent, woven into the landscape. When you understand the Abzu, you understand why Enki's wisdom is not abstract philosophy. It is embodied knowledge, knowledge that flows, knowledge that supports. It is the kind of wisdom that shows up when you are trying to fix a problem with limited resources, so no guarantee anyone will thank you. Which, honestly, describes most of human history and also most group chats. You take a slow breath. The smell is damp earth and faint algae, and it is strangely comforting. You realize you have been carrying tension in your shoulders like it is an heirloom, and the Abzu idea gently suggests you can put it down. Under the surface, something is holding you up. But mythology never gives you only comfort. It gives you structure, and structure means boundaries, and boundaries mean conflict. The Abzu in Mesopotamian cosmology sits in a larger story about the origins of the world. In some traditions, there are primordial waters, and the cosmos emerges out of watery chaos. Enki, as Lord of Sweet Water, becomes a civilizing force within that watery beginning. He is not the ocean that swallows. He is the fresh water that can be directed, contained, and used. You can already sense the symbolic contrast, saltwater chaos versus freshwater order. If you want a modern analogy, salt water is your notifications tab, endless and loud. Fresh water is airplane mode with a cup of tea. Here comes your first soft joke of this section. You imagine the Abzu as the original do not disturb setting for the universe. Everything loud happens on the surface. Everything wise happens below. Enki, of course, is the admin. As you let this sink in, you also notice how the Abzu is not just a place. It is a concept that gives Mesopotamian religion a deep foundation. It helps explain why temples might have sacred pools, why purification matters, why certain rituals invoke water as a force of renewal. In that sense, Enki is not just a character in stories. He is the theological justification for an entire sensory experience. Cool water on hands, the feeling of being reset, the sense that the world has layers and not all of them are chaotic. Now for a quirky or fringe tidbit, handled gently again. Some modern interpretations, especially in New Age circles, talk about the Abzu as if it were a literal energetic grid or an earth memory reservoir, a kind of mystical database you can tap into. This is not how the ancient texts present it, and historians would not call it evidence-based, but it is fascinating as a modern echo of an ancient idea, the sense that wisdom is stored below, hidden, accessible if you know the right method. In other words, the Abzu becomes a metaphor modern people cannot resist upgrading, like taking an old myth and adding Wi-Fi. You stay by the pool a while longer, and the night feels thicker, like velvet. You think about Enki not only as water, but as the keeper of boundaries, fresh water and salt water, underground and surface, sacred and ordinary. That boundary work is essential in a river civilization. You do not survive by pretending the river will always be kind. You survive by understanding it, respecting it, and building systems to manage it. And that brings in the open scholarly debate, the one you can let hover without needing to resolve. Historians still argue whether the Abzu concept was primarily a theological abstraction about cosmic origins, or whether it grew directly from practical experiences of groundwater, wells, and irrigation, later mythologized into a divine realm. The truth might be both, tangled. People live with water problems. They create stories to make sense of them. Those stories shape rituals. The rituals shape society. Society changes. The stories shift. It is like watching ripples overlap in the pool, impossible to separate once they meet. You stand and keep walking, and you notice your footsteps feel quieter now, like you are trying not to wake the earth. The city is behind you, But you are not leaving civilization. You are entering the idea that civilization rests on unseen supports. Canals are visible, but groundwater is hidden. Laws are visible, but the shared belief in them is hidden. Temples are visible, but the awe that fills them is hidden. Enki belongs to hidden supports. Second joke. Warm and sleepy. You think about how people today call it adulting when they manage basic life tasks. In Mesopotamia, they basically invented adulting as a civilization, and Enki is the patron saint of fixing the plumbing. You cross a small bridge, and the water below is darker. Deeper, you imagine the Abzu stretching beneath you, endless, cool, and patient. And for a moment, you picture Enki there, not on a throne made of gold, but in a calm, echoing space where water moves slowly. He is not flashy. He is effective. He does not need to thunder because he can simply open a channel and change the world. As you head back toward the city lights, you realize this is the hinge of your beginner understanding. Enki is not water god in the shallow sense. He is fresh water. Yes, but fresh water as wisdom, as hidden stability, as the quiet mind that makes life possible. He is the deep foundation under the clay brick house, the cool shadow under the hot sun. And now, because you have felt his realm, you are ready to feel his personality. You are about to meet Enki not just as a place, but as a presence in stories. The calm genius archetype, the one who solves problems while everyone else is panicking like chickens in a sandstorm. You turn toward the temple district again, and the night follows you like a soft cloak. You walk back toward the thicker part of the city, where the temples rise like dark ships docked in moonlight, their edges softened by the night. The canal runs beside you, still whispering, still steady, and you start to notice how the sound of water is basically the soundtrack of Enki's brain. Calm is not just a mood here, it is a method. It is what you get when you understand systems well enough to stop flailing. In the temple district, there is a different kind of quiet. It is not empty. It is curated. A priest passes with a small lamp, the flame sheltered by their palm, and you get this sense of practiced steadiness. Like everyone here has trained themselves not to rush because rushing makes mistakes, and mistakes make gods cranky. You linger near a doorway where carved patterns catch the light, and you think about how Enki shows up in myths, not as the loudest, not as the strictest, not as the most terrifying. He shows up as the one who figures things out. That is the calm genius archetype. Enki is the god who looks at a messy cosmic situation and thinks, okay, but what's the workaround? He is a divine problem solver, a strategist, a fixer. If Mesopotamian mythology were an office, Enki would be the person who knows where the files are, who can actually use the printer, and who quietly saves the whole project at 11:58 p.m. without making it weird. This is your first joke for this section, and it is painfully relatable. Enki is the one god who would say, "Did you try turning it off and on again?" And somehow that would work on the universe, a mainstream historical fact to anchor you. Enki appears prominently in several Sumerian myths where he dispenses wisdom, establishes order, or intervenes in divine plans. This is not a minor background deity. He is a central figure in the mythic logic of how civilization functions. And because the Sumerians and later Mesopotamian cultures take knowledge seriously, a god of wisdom is not decorative. He is structural. People do not just pray for rain. They pray for good judgment, for protection, for the right ritual, for the right words. Enki is associated with those right words, the kind that untie knots you did not even know were there. You move through a side courtyard and overhear a pair of scribes murmuring about a text. One of them taps the clay tablet with a stylus, like they're emphasizing a point in a meeting. You cannot read it from here, but you can feel what they feel, that recorded knowledge matters, that written words can carry power, that knowing the correct incantation, the correct ritual sequence, the correct mythic precedent, is like having the legal paperwork for reality. Enki is connected to that world. He is the patron of knowing how things work. And in a society that values scribal learning, that is a kind of divine superpower. But calm genius is not the same as passive. Enki's cleverness often comes with a hint of improvisation. He is not always following the strictest line. Sometimes he bends things. Sometimes he reframes things. Sometimes he finds a loophole the way water finds a crack in a wall. This is where you feel the contrast with other divine figures who represent authority, command, or law. Enki's authority is softer. It persuades, it redirects, it outsmarts. You can almost see it in your mind as a scene. Other gods are arguing, voices rising, tempers sparking, and Enki is just sitting there with the calm posture of someone who already mapped the whole situation. Not smug, just prepared. He waits until the noise peaks. Then he offers a solution that makes everyone blink and suddenly realize the argument had an exit the whole time. Now, because you are in beginner mode, you do not need to memorize a list of every time he does this. You just need to understand the pattern. Enki's role in many myths is to prevent cosmic plans from becoming catastrophes. He is the god of the second option, the alternative path, the clever fix. He is the spirit of "we can still salvage this," which is basically the emotional foundation of civilization. And here is where the scholarly debate breathes in, like cool air through reeds. Historians still argue whether Enki's problem-solver image reflects the values of specific cities and priestly communities who promoted him, or whether it emerges more broadly from Mesopotamian cultural respect for wisdom and technical knowledge. In other words, is Enki calm and clever because that is how the stories naturally shaped him, or because certain groups wanted him to be seen that way, for political or religious reasons? The myths survive in copies, in versions, across time. They are not static, they are curated. And that means Enki's personality, as you experience it, is partly ancient storytelling and partly ancient branding. You drift toward a basin where water is used for ritual washing. Someone has left a small towel cloth draped nearby, and the water surface reflects the lamp's flicker. You realize that calm genius is also a soothing aesthetic. Enki is a god you can imagine trusting. You might fear a storm god. You might bargain with a war god. But Enki feels like someone you would actually ask for advice. Like the friend who does not just say, "that sucks," but says, "Okay, here's what we do next." Second joke. Low and sleepy. You imagine Enki on a modern advice podcast, and his entire brand would be hydrate, write it down, and stop texting your ex, not because he is judgmental, but because he is practical, and also because he is literally associated with water and writing. So it feels unfairly appropriate. Now for the quirky or fringe tidbit of this section. Some interpreters, especially those who like to look for archetypes across cultures, point out that Enki resembles later culture hero figures. Characters who bring skills, knowledge, or civilization to humans, sometimes by trickery, sometimes by kindness. This is not fringe in the aliens sense, but it is a bit speculative because it leans on comparative mythology, which can get messy. Still, the idea is charming. Enki is the archetype of the benefactor who upgrades humanity's toolkit. He is not just worshipped. He is narratively positioned as the one who makes life more livable. You feel that as you watch a craftsman in the dim light, smoothing wet clay, shaping it into something useful. The movements are slow, confident. The hands know what to do. And you remember, Enki's realm is the Abzu, sweet water. Water plus clay equals bricks, pottery, tablets. Civilization itself is literally molded from his elements. That is not just poetic. It is structural symbolism. Enki is the god whose materials become society's bones. As you walk, you also notice the subtle edge of Enki's calm. Sometimes calm genius can look like manipulation if you're not careful. If a god is always the one finding loopholes, you have to ask, loopholes for whom? Who benefits? And this is where Enki's myths get interesting, because he often helps humans, sometimes against other divine decisions. That makes him beloved. But it also puts him in tension with the idea of divine hierarchy. He is a counselor, yes, but he is also a wild card in the most helpful way. You pause near a wall where old plaster is flaking, revealing earlier layers beneath. It is a small detail, but it feels like a metaphor. Enki's calm is layered. Under the gentle surface is intense competence. Under the competence is deep knowledge. Under the knowledge is water, always water, moving and reshaping quietly. Third joke. Soft. You think about how people romanticize being mysterious. But Enki is not mysterious in the pretentious way. He is mysterious in the he actually read the manual way. And that is scarier. Honestly, you move forward, and the temple district thins. The canal bends. The night continues to hold you. You now understand Enki not just as fresh water, not just as Abzu Lord, not just as symbol and title, but as a personality pattern in the myths. The calm genius who finds a way through. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it. Every time the stories threaten to go off the rails, you start expecting him to appear, smoothing things out, redirecting fate like a hand guiding water into a channel. And the next thing you're about to learn is that his cleverness is not always clean and orderly. Sometimes it is playful, sometimes it is sneaky, sometimes it looks like trickery, but with good intentions, you keep walking. And you can almost hear Enki's quiet chuckle in the water, like he knows what you're about to witness. You keep drifting through the city's sleeping veins, and the canals look darker now, like ink poured into shallow trenches. The lamps are fewer, the stars sharper, and everything feels slower, as if the whole world is trying not to wake up the river. Your footsteps soften, your thoughts soften, and right when you settle into that calm genius vibe, you remember the other side of Enki, the one that makes the myths sparkle a little. He is not just wise, he is tricky, not malicious tricky. More like, I solved your problem, but you will be mildly confused about how tricky. You can sense it in the way people tell his stories. There is respect, yes, but also that little smile people get when they talk about someone who is clever enough to bend rules without breaking the whole world. Enki's trickster energy is not about chaos for chaos's sake. It is about flexibility. It is the understanding that rigid plans can become cruel, and sometimes the kindest act is finding a way around a harsh decision. Water does that. It does not argue with the rock. It just goes around it. Enki is water with a brain. A mainstream historical fact to anchor you. Mesopotamian myths often portray gods as negotiating, scheming, or outmaneuvering one another, reflecting a divine society with politics, alliances, and disputes. Enki fits neatly into this divine politics as a figure who uses intelligence and cunning rather than brute force. The gods are not simple moral icons. They are personalities, and their stories mirror the realities of human power, where persuasion and strategy matter as much as authority. You slip past a closed market stall, and the smell of dried dates and woven reeds still lingers. It makes you think of how myths are stored, too, as lingering scents of ancient concerns, in a world where floods can wipe out a harvest, where drought can empty a canal. People value a god who can adapt. Enki's trickster side is basically adaptive intelligence personified. He can pivot, he can improvise, he can break tension with humor or distraction, then slide a solution into place. Here is your first sleepy joke of the section. If Enki were a modern friend, he would be the one who accidentally gets you out of an awkward party by starting a harmless argument about whether a hot dog is a sandwich. Everyone turns to debate, and you quietly escape. That is Enki energy, not violence, diversion, and the diversion often serves a purpose. Enki's myths frequently show him helping humanity, even when other divine forces lean toward punishment or restraint. This is why he can feel like a benevolent trickster. He uses cleverness to protect life, to keep things from tipping into needless destruction. He is the god of the workaround. Again. But here the workaround has a wink. You pause by a canal gate, and you watch water press against wood. It does not smash through. It tests. It seeps. It waits. That is what Enki does when rules are too strict. He tests the boundaries. He finds the weak points. He does not necessarily overthrow authority. He just makes sure authority does not become absurd. Now, here comes the open scholarly debate. Floating in like mist, historians still argue whether Enki's trickster-like behavior in certain myths should be read as a moral endorsement of clever rule-bending, or as a cautionary illustration of divine unpredictability. Does the story invite you to admire Enki's cunning, or to recognize that even benevolent gods can be slippery and hard to fully trust? Different texts and contexts tilt the vibe one way or the other. And because myths were copied and performed in different settings, the lesson could shift depending on who was listening and why. You wander into a quieter alley where the walls are close, and you feel the intimacy of storytelling. This is where you imagine a family at night, passing down tales to make sense of the world. In that setting, Enki's trickster side is comforting. It suggests that if reality gets harsh, there might still be a clever exit, that fate is not always a straight line, that a smarter path can be found, even if it looks like bending the rules, but you also sense the danger in it. If cleverness becomes an excuse for irresponsibility, the whole system collapses. So Enki's trickster side is often balanced by his wisdom. He is not a prankster god who knocks over the furniture and runs away laughing. He is the one who knocks over the furniture to reveal the hidden door under the rug. Annoying? Yes. Useful? Also yes. Second joke. Gentle. You picture Enki as the person who changes your phone settings to fix a problem, and it works. But now your keyboard is in a different language, and you're like, thank you. But also, why am I suddenly typing in ancient Sumerian? He smiles. He does not explain. He just hands you a cup of water. Now for the quirky fringe tidbit, the one that pops up in modern conversations about Enki's intent. Some modern esoteric narratives paint Enki as the good rebel in a cosmic conflict, sometimes opposing harsher divine authority figures. In those retellings, he becomes a champion of humans, almost like a mythic whistleblower. This framing is not a mainstream academic conclusion. It is more like modern myth-making layered on ancient myth-making, but it reveals something real about Enki's appeal. People want a powerful protector who uses cleverness to shield the vulnerable. And honestly, even without the modern spin, Enki's ancient portrayal gives you enough to understand why that appeal exists. In multiple stories, he is associated with guidance, with knowledge that helps humans navigate a dangerous world. He's not always openly defiant, but he is often quietly subversive in the service of preserving life. You keep walking, and the night feels like a slow river itself. Your mind drifts to the way Mesopotamians viewed order. Order is precious. It is the difference between a stable harvest and hunger. But order can be brittle. It can become cruel if it ignores circumstance. Enki's trickster side is like the flex in the system, the ability to adjust. It is the part of the mythic universe that says, rules matter, but so does life. You stop at a small shrine where someone has left a little bowl of water. The surface is still. It reflects your face dimly. And for a second, you imagine Enki watching through it. Amused, patient. You feel the tension between divine decree and divine compassion. You feel the tension between strict authority and clever mercy. That tension is where Enki thrives. And now, because you have tasted his trickster side, you are ready for the next big step, creation. Because in Mesopotamian thought, creation is not always a clean, holy act. Sometimes it is messy, made of mud and water, shaped by practical needs, and guided by gods who are thinking like engineers. You will move from Enki's personality into Enki's handiwork, into stories where life is shaped from wet clay, and you will see how his calm cleverness becomes the literal material of humanity. You leave the shrine behind, the bowl of water still catching starlight, and you follow the canal as it curves toward the places where stories begin, with earth, with water, with hands that know how to shape a world. You keep following the canal, and the city feels like it has settled into deeper sleep, the way a body relaxes when it finally decides to trust the night. The water is darker now, but it still carries that soft, steady sound, like breathing. You pass stacks of dried reeds and a pile of clay bricks waiting for morning labor, and it hits you with the simplest, most physical truth in the whole Enki story. This civilization is built out of mud and water, not metaphorically, literally. So when the myths talk about creation in terms of clay and moisture, it is not just poetic. It is them looking at their own hands and saying, yeah, this is how the world feels. You stop near a workshop where the door's half open, and inside there is a low table with lumps of clay resting under damp cloth. It smells earthy, mineral, clean. Someone has left fingerprints in the clay, and those small impressions feel almost sacred. You imagine ancient scribes pressing styluses into tablets, and potters shaping bowls, and builders stacking bricks, all of them cooperating with the basic fact that wet earth can become almost anything if you know what you're doing. This is where Enki's domain becomes creation's toolkit. Sweet water plus earth equals shape, order, and life. A mainstream historical fact to anchor you. Mesopotamian creation traditions include multiple versions and layers across Sumerian, Akkadian, and later Babylonian texts, and many of them portray humans as fashioned from clay, sometimes mixed with divine substance. The details vary by story and period, but the clay motif is a recurring, recognizable thread, the very medium of writing. Clay tablets reinforces that imagery. People record myths about being made of clay on clay. That is a loop so perfectly symbolic, it almost feels like Enki nudging the universe and going, see, it matches. In many narratives, Enki is deeply involved in the how of creation, not always as the top ruler issuing commands, but as the architect or technician who understands materials. You can feel his calm genius here. A world does not appear because someone yells, "Let there be." A world appears because someone manages resources, sets boundaries, organizes functions. Enki's creation energy feels like irrigation planning, but cosmic, like someone drawing lines on the ground and saying, water here, fields there, people here, responsibilities there. It is not glamorous, but it is everything. You walk past a shallow basin and watch someone, maybe a temple servant, pour water carefully. The action is slow and deliberate, and it feels like a ritual even if it is just housekeeping. That is what creation stories do. They take the ordinary and reveal its sacred pattern. They say, you see that motion, that is how the universe stays alive. And here comes your first sleepy joke. You realize humanity's origin story here is basically, you are a mud project, not in an insulting way, in a tender, practical way, like you are a carefully sculpted lump of earth with feelings and responsibilities. And honestly, that explains why you sometimes need naps. Mud dries out. Mud cracks. Mud needs water. So yes, drink some water. You ancient clay creature. Now, because you are in beginner guide mode, you do not need to get lost in every text. You just need to understand the recurring pattern. Creation is messy and material. Gods use tangible stuff, not just pure light. Enki's Abzu waters are not only spiritual. They are the ingredient that makes clay workable. The mythic logic is sensory. Life comes from the same stuff you build with. It ties humans to the land in a way that feels intimate and slightly humbling. You are not made from stardust in this story. You are made from riverbank reality. But the myths also have a social angle. Why create humans at all? In some Mesopotamian traditions, humans are created to do labor, to maintain temples, to feed gods through offerings, to carry the workload of civilization. That is not exactly the dreamy, you are special vibe modern self-help books want. It is more like, congratulations, you exist, here is your shift. And yet, within that harshness, there is also dignity. You are part of a cosmic arrangement. You have a role. You keep order. You keep the world running. Enki's involvement suggests that the creator is not cruel for fun, but pragmatic. A system needs workers. A civilization needs maintenance. Even gods, in these stories, prefer not to do all the chores themselves. Honestly, relatable. This is where the open scholarly debate slides in, quiet but persistent. Historians still argue whether the humans created for labor theme should be read primarily as a reflection of temple-centered economies and social hierarchy, or as a deeper theological statement about humanity's purpose in a divinely ordered cosmos. Is it propaganda for the system, reinforcing why people should serve temples? Or is it an honest cosmic philosophy that every being exists within a web of obligations? The texts can support different readings depending on context, and that ambiguity is part of why these myths remain so fascinating. You keep moving, and you picture the act of molding a human figure from clay. Hands pressing, smoothing, shaping. Water added slowly so it does not crack. It is an image that feels tender, even if the reasons for creation are practical. The tenderness comes from attention. To make something carefully, you must focus on it. Enki's creation role often carries that sense of attentive craft. Now, for a quirky or fringe tidbit, the kind that makes you tilt your head and go, huh. Some modern writers like to interpret these clay creation myths as encoded memories of early technological leaps, like the invention of pottery, brickmaking, or even metallurgy. And they treat Enki as a symbol of technical revolution. That is speculative, and it can be overreached if you push it too hard. But there is a kernel of insight. These myths emerge from a world where mastering materials is synonymous with survival. So the divine narrative naturally glorifies the craft of shaping earth and water into tools, shelter, and record-keeping. In that sense, Enki as creator is also Enki as patron of technology, in the broad ancient sense of technique. Second joke, soft. You imagine a divine workshop sign that says, Enki's Creation Studio. We make humans. No refunds. And someone scribbled underneath, please water your clay regularly. Again, drink water. You are basically an ancient brick with anxiety. You pause and look at the clay bricks stacked by the road. They are rectangular, uniform, and they smell like sun-baked earth. The idea of uniformity is important. Creation stories are also about classification. What is a person? What is a god? What is an animal? What is a city? What is a river? Enki's wisdom organizes categories. He makes life legible, and legibility is comfort. If you can name it, you can manage it. If you can manage it, you can live. There is another layer too. The act of creating humans from clay echoes the scribal act of creating meaning from clay tablets. Scribes press signs into wet clay, and those signs become lore, myth, history, a memory that outlives the speaker. Enki's domain over wisdom and crafts means he lives in that act as well, hovering in every wedge mark, every record, every bit of knowledge preserved against forgetfulness. Creation is not only the origin of bodies, it is the origin of culture. You start to feel the narrative momentum. If Enki helps shape life, then he also becomes invested in preserving it, and that, very naturally, leads you toward the next big story beat that everyone hears about eventually, the flood. Because if you create something, and someone else wants to wipe it out, you're going to have feelings, or at least a plan. Enki is not the god of tantrums. He is the god of contingency. You turn back toward the river, and the distant sound of water seems to deepen, like it is remembering old catastrophes. The night breeze carries a faint chill now, and you realize you are stepping toward a story where the world is threatened. And Enki does what he does best. He finds a way through, quietly, cleverly, with the calm urgency of someone saving what matters, without needing applause. You keep walking until the canal merges closer to the main river, and the sound changes. It is no longer the polite hush of guided water. It is deeper, broader, more confident, like the river is reminding you who runs this whole neighborhood. The air cools again, and you can smell that sharp, wet scent of open water and silt. It is beautiful, but it is also the kind of beauty that could ruin your entire life if it decides to rise at the wrong time. You stand there listening, and you can almost feel ancient people listening the same way, trying to guess what the river is planning. Spoiler, it never tells you. This is the perfect place for the flood story to slide in, not as a dramatic announcement, but as a memory the landscape carries. In Mesopotamian myth, flood narratives appear in multiple traditions, and one of Enki's most famous roles is the quiet act of helping a human survive a divine decision to send a flood. The key beginner-friendly takeaway is simple: when destruction becomes policy, Enki becomes the loophole, a mainstream historical fact to anchor you. Mesopotamian flood stories appear in famous ancient texts, including versions preserved in Akkadian literature and embedded within broader epics, and they share motifs with later flood traditions in the region. The specifics differ across texts, but the pattern is recognizable. Gods decide to flood. A favored human is warned. A vessel is built. Life is preserved. Enki or Ea is the figure associated with warning or guidance in these narratives, often in a way that technically obeys the letter of divine decisions while undermining their outcome. You stand on the riverbank and imagine it, not as a Hollywood disaster scene, but as an ancient nightmare, the sky refusing to stop, the ground turning to soup, the river swelling beyond its banks, canals losing their boundaries. Water, which is normally life, becomes the instrument of erasure. This is the shadow side of the element Enki rules. He is lord of sweet water. Yes, but he also knows what water can do when it is not guided. The flood is the moment the whole system breaks. In some tellings, the divine council decides humans are too noisy, too disruptive, too much. That detail always feels oddly modern, like the gods filed a noise complaint. You can almost hear a divine neighbor banging on the ceiling with a broom. This is your first joke of the section. Sleepy and mild. Imagine the universe ending because humanity would not stop being loud. Honestly, if you have ever heard someone watch videos at full volume on public transport, you can see how a deity might snap. But Enki does not snap. He calculates. He looks at the decision and thinks, okay, we are not doing total extinction if I can help it. Here is where Enki's trickster with good intentions side becomes most obvious. The divine rules might forbid him from directly warning humanity. So he does not directly warn humanity. He whispers to a wall, or to a reed hut, or through a dream, depending on the version, so that the message reaches the human without Enki technically breaking the decree. It is the most divine form of malicious compliance, except it is not malicious. It is compassionate. He is obeying the letter, saving the spirit. You picture the chosen survivor, often known in different traditions by different names, hearing the warning in a strange way. Like the house itself is talking, they are told to build a boat, to gather animals, to store supplies. The instruction is practical, detailed, and that detail feels like Enki. He is not the god of vague inspirational quotes. He is the god of, here are the measurements, here is the plan, do it now. He's the calm voice in a crisis, the one who tells you what step comes next. The river in front of you ripples, and you think about how flood myths function. They are not only religious, they are also memory. Mesopotamia experiences real floods, and those floods can be catastrophic. A flood myth takes the terror of water's unpredictability and turns it into a narrative with moral shape and divine drama. It says, "This disaster was not random. It had reasons. It had decisions. It had an escape route." That last part is Enki's gift, the escape route. Now the open, scholarly debate arrives, low and thoughtful. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian flood narratives originate primarily from specific historical flood events remembered and mythologized, or whether they emerge as a broader symbolic theme about divine judgment, cosmic reset, and the fragility of civilization. There may have been real floods that left deep impressions. There may also have been an archetypal fear of water's power that naturally shaped stories. The texts themselves do not hand you a neat answer. They hand you a myth that feels true in the way nightmares feel true. You let the debate hover, and you keep your attention on Enki's role. Because for a beginner, the key point is not proving the flood happened exactly like this. The key point is understanding what Enki represents in the story: mercy, intelligence, and the refusal to let a system become needlessly cruel. He is the god who says, "We can reset without deleting everything." He is the one who believes life should continue, even if it has been annoying. Now for a quirky tidbit that sits on the edge of mainstream. Some interpreters point out that Enki's method of warning, speaking indirectly to avoid breaking a divine oath, reveals a sophisticated ethical tension in the myths. It is not just good God saves humans. It is good God navigates a flawed divine legal system. That is a very modern-feeling problem. The idea that rules can be unjust, but you still have to operate within them to do the right thing. Enki becomes the patron of ethical loopholes, which sounds terrible until you realize how often loopholes are the only way to protect someone in a rigid system. Second joke. Gentle. Enki would absolutely be the friend who says, "I cannot tell you directly, but if you just so happen to look under the third rock by the canal at sunrise, you might find what you need." And then he walks away, humming like he did nothing. The gods ask, "Did you warn them?" Enki points at the wall and says, "I spoke to the wall. The wall did what it did." Technically correct, the best kind of correct. You can feel him smiling. You watch the river, and you think about the aftermath. Flood stories often include a new beginning, an offering, a re-establishment of order. Life returns. The world is not the same, but it continues. Enki's involvement ties him to continuity. He is not the god of endings. He is the god of "we keep going." That is why his calm is so soothing. It is not denial. It is resilience. And there is a darker undertone too. If Enki saves a human against divine consensus, it implies conflict among the gods. It implies that the divine world is not a single will, but a negotiation. This sets up your next movement naturally, because you can already feel the tension between Enki and stricter divine authority figures. The flood story hints at that. Someone wants a hard reset. Someone wants a workaround. Enki is the workaround. You stand up straighter, and the wind pushes against you. The river is still flowing, indifferent to your thoughts. But you feel like you understand one of the 7 calm facts more deeply now. Enki is often portrayed as a protector of humanity through clever, indirect help, especially in catastrophe narratives like the flood. He is not always loud. He is not always officially in charge. But he finds a way. Third joke. Soft and sleepy. You imagine Enki's cosmic job title as Chief Risk Officer of Reality. He does not prevent every disaster, but he keeps the disaster from becoming total. He is the reason there is still a story after the storm. You take one last look at the river's black surface, and you let the flood memory dissolve back into night. The next thing waiting for you is the relationship that makes all this tension clearer. Enki and Enlil, the strict force of command. You start walking again, following the water's edge, and the night feels like it is about to teach you how the universe argues with itself. You keep to the river's edge, and the city behind you feels like a cluster of sleeping thoughts. Temple roofs and mud brick walls piled low under the stars. The river stays awake, though it keeps moving, steady and indifferent, like it has watched every argument in history and decided not to pick a side. You can feel the flood story still clinging to your skin like damp air, and it naturally pulls you toward the next tension, the one that explains why Enki sometimes has to whisper to walls instead of speaking openly. Because in Mesopotamian myth, the universe is not run by one personality. It is run by a committee. And if you have ever been in a committee, you already know the vibe. Half order, half ego, and a lot of "who approved this?" Enlil is the name that starts to loom in the background like a darker cloud, where Enki feels like sweet water and quiet problem-solving. Enlil is often portrayed as authority, command, and the force of decree. Enlil's domain is commonly associated with wind, storms, and the space between earth and sky. And in many traditions he functions as a chief executive kind of deity, the one whose decisions shape fate. If Enki is the engineer, Enlil is the policy. If Enki is the workaround, Enlil was the rule. A mainstream historical fact to anchor you. In Sumerian religion, Enlil is one of the most prominent gods, especially tied to the city of Nippur, and he appears in many myths as a central authority figure in the pantheon. That matters because it means Enki's stories are not just solo adventures. They are often set in a divine political landscape where Enlil's word carries weight. When Enki helps humans or distributes knowledge, he's doing it inside a system where someone else might want strict control. You walk through a narrow street where the wind funnels between walls, and it suddenly makes sense why these gods feel like they're elements. A gust hits you, pushes dust along the ground, rattles a reed bundle. Wind is commanding. Wind does not negotiate. Water, though, does. Water can be guided, diverted, stored. Water adapts. So even if you have never read a tablet in your life, your body understands the symbolism. Enlil is the gust that demands. Enki is the current that persists, and yet it is not as simple as Enlil bad, Enki good. The myths do not let you flatten them that easily. Enlil represents order, and order is necessary. Without order, there is no irrigation schedule, no stable city, no predictable ritual, no social contract that keeps you from being robbed every time you step outside. The same strictness that can feel harsh is also what holds civilization together. The problem is when strictness becomes inflexible, when it forgets that humans are made of clay and panic, not of perfect obedience. So you start to feel their relationship as a balance rather than a battle. Enki is the soft intelligence that keeps order humane. Enlil is the hard authority that keeps order enforceable. They are like two hands trying to hold the same bowl. One stabilizes, one shapes. Sometimes that teamwork looks like harmony. Sometimes it looks like a tug of war. First joke. Gentle. You imagine the divine group chat Sir Enlil posts? New rule, no more noise. Enki reacts with a little water droplet emoji and then privately messages a reed hut, build a boat. Enlil, who is leaking plans? Enki, must be condensation. You can practically hear the temples creak with gossip. You move closer to a temple courtyard where the air smells of incense and wet clay. Somewhere inside, a priest chants softly, and the rhythm feels like a law being spoken into the dark. This is where you sense Enlil's presence. Decree, structure, hierarchy. But you also sense Enki's presence in the quiet side rooms, where knowledge is stored and rituals are prepared, where scribes copy texts that preserve the memory of how things should be done. Enlil is the public order. Enki is the backstage competence that makes the public order possible. This is also where historians still argue whether the tension between Enki and Enlil in myth reflects actual political and religious competition between city-states and priesthoods, or whether it is primarily a theological attempt to explain how different forces of nature and governance coexist. Were these stories a way for different cult centers to negotiate prestige, like ancient PR campaigns carved into clay? Or were they simply narrative expressions of a real human truth? That a world needs both rules and compassion, both command and flexibility? The debate stays open because the evidence is layered, copied, edited, and always embedded in the priorities of the people who preserved it. You pause beside a drainage channel and watch water thread through it. The channel is narrow, controlled. It exists because someone imposed structure on water. That's Enlil's vibe. Channel the forces, enforce the boundaries, but the water still has its own personality. It still finds tiny ways to move, to swirl, to test the edges. That's Enki's vibe, work within the structure. But never stop being alive. Now for the quirky tidbit, the one that feels slightly off to the side but still interesting. Some modern readers love casting Enki and Enlil as a cosmic, strict parent versus chill parent duo. With Enlil as the one who grounds you for existing, and Enki as the one who slips you snacks and says, just do your best. It is a meme version of mythology, and it oversimplifies, but it also captures a psychological truth. People project family dynamics onto divine dynamics because it helps them understand power. The gods become relatable, the cosmos becomes a household. And you, the tiny human made of mud, become the kid listening at the door while the adults argue about your future. Second joke. Soft. You imagine Enlil writing no in massive capital letters across the sky, and Enki quietly adding a footnote at the bottom, except in emergencies. That footnote is basically the entire flood story. You keep walking, and you feel how this tension shapes the myths you have already touched. Creation. Who gets to define humanity's role? Who sets the terms? Who enforces the system? Flood. Who gets to decide when the system resets? Who can soften that decision without toppling the whole order? Even the Abzu concept sits inside this, a hidden reservoir of stability beneath a world governed by visible decrees. Enki's relationship with Enlil also highlights something deeper about Mesopotamian religion. It is not purely devotional. It is analytical. It is asking, why does the world work the way it does? And the answer is not one voice. It is multiple divine voices negotiating. One voice says, order must be maintained. Another says, life must be preserved. The world becomes a compromise between forces. You notice the wind picking up again. Cool against your face. It feels like Enlil brushing past, reminding you that the universe has sharp edges. Then you hear the water below. Steady, patient, and it feels like Enki answering, yes, but we can still live here. Third joke. Sleepy and small. You realize you have basically been walking through an ancient management training seminar. Enlil is the compliance department, Enki is operations, and humanity is the intern with no onboarding. As the night deepens, you turn toward the oldest feeling part of the landscape, the place where Enki's presence is said to pool like groundwater in mythic memory. The tension with Enlil has clarified his role. Enki is not the top ruler, but he is indispensable. He is the balancing force that keeps strict authority from becoming total erasure. And now you are ready to step into the city, most closely tied to him, the place that feels like the first page of civilization's scrapbook. Eridu waits ahead like a quiet thought you cannot quite shake, and you follow the water toward it, letting the wind fade behind you. You keep moving, and the city around you thins into something older feeling, as if the streets are gradually remembering their first shapes. The river stays near, sometimes visible, sometimes hidden behind reeds and low walls, but always audible, always present, like a friend walking beside you in the dark without needing to talk. The wind calms, and the night becomes softer again, which feels right, because the next place you drift toward is not loud with power. It is heavy with beginnings. Eridu is the name that settles into your mind, like a stone dropped into water, making slow ripples. In Mesopotamian tradition, Eridu is often treated as one of the earliest cities, sometimes even the first, a place with ancient prestige and mythic gravity. It is tied closely to Enki's worship, and you can feel why. Eridu is near water, near the idea of springs and wetlands, near the life that gathers where sweet water meets earth. When people talk about Enki's city, they talk about a place that feels like civilization's first breath. A mainstream historical fact to anchor you: Eridu is an archaeological site in southern Mesopotamia, associated with very early urban development in the region, and later Mesopotamian tradition remembered it as a primeval city with deep religious significance. You do not have to be an archaeologist to feel the weight of that. Just imagine living in a world where the oldest city is not a museum piece but a mythic ancestor. Like a grandparent everyone respects, even if they do not agree on the details of the story. You approach what feels like the edge of Eridu, and it is quiet, quieter than the temple district you left behind. The buildings sit low, the ground is uneven, the air smells damp, a little brackish, with that marshy scent of reeds and mud. You can hear insects, the tiny night chorus that makes you realize life is everywhere, even when humans are sleeping. And you can almost taste the reason Enki belongs here: water that is not the sea. Not chaos, but not entirely tame either. Wetlands are in-between places. They are thresholds. Enki loves thresholds. You walk past a patch of reeds that sway gently, and you think about how cities begin. Not with grand speeches, but with practical decisions: where to dig a canal, where to build a wall, where to place a shrine, where to store grain. Eridu in myth becomes the symbolic answer to the question, where did civilization start? And Enki, the god of wisdom and sweet water, becomes the perfect patron for that origin. Because civilization is not born from violence alone. It is born from water management, craft, record-keeping, and the slow accumulation of know-how. First joke. Sleepy and affectionate. You realize Eridu is basically the original starter pack city. Comes with reeds, mud brick, canals, and one extremely important water wisdom god included in the bundle. Some assembly required. No instruction manual. Enki is the instruction manual. As you move deeper, you imagine the temple of Enki here, often associated with the Abzu. The idea is not just that he has a temple, but that his temple is connected to the deep freshwater realm, like the building sits above a spiritual wellspring. Even if you never see the temple in its full ancient glory, you can feel the concept, a sacred space that taps into the foundation of life. Priests would have used water in rituals, purification, and offerings, treating it as a bridge between the divine and the daily. Enki's presence would have been felt in every splash, every rinsed hand, every whispered incantation, and this is where the atmosphere becomes almost ASMR-like. You hear water in channels. You hear sandals on packed earth. You hear the soft scrape of a clay jar being set down. You feel the rhythm of a city that understands the value of quiet competence. Enki's city would not want theatrical chaos. It would want stable water, predictable harvests, and knowledge passed forward without being lost. Now the open, scholarly debate slides in, calm but persistent. Historians still argue how to interpret later Mesopotamian claims about Eridu being the first city. Are these claims reflections of genuine cultural memory of Eridu's early importance, amplified over time? Or are they mythic prestige narratives, a way for later scribes and priesthoods to anchor legitimacy in an imagined golden past? The archaeological record shows Eridu's early development, but firstness in myth is also a symbolic title, not a data point. It is like calling someone the father of music. It says more about respect than about timelines. You sit on a low wall and let the night settle around you. The stars look close. The reeds sway. You feel that Eridu is not only a location, it is a mood, ancient, damp, steady. It is the kind of place where a god of sweet water makes sense because the landscape itself teaches you that life depends on hidden sources. Every spring is a miracle. Every well is a negotiation with the earth. Now for a quirky tidbit that feels just off to the side. In some later Mesopotamian traditions and king lists, there are fascinating claims about antediluvian times, kingship descending from heaven, and primeval eras tied to early cities like Eridu. These stories blur myth and political ideology, painting a world where civilization is not invented by humans alone, but granted, organized, and legitimized by divine order. Enki's association with Eridu fits beautifully into that worldview, because he is the god who makes civilization intelligible. He is the one who can hand down the know-how, the sacred decrees, the ritual structures that make a city more than a pile of houses. Second joke. Soft. You imagine ancient scribes arguing like modern fandoms. Actually, my city is the first city. No, mine is... Enki literally lives here. Okay, but our god has better branding. And somewhere. Enki is sipping sweet water like... Children, please, you're all made of clay. You stand again and walk slowly, and you realize something important for your beginner understanding. Enki is not just a cosmic figure. He is local. He is rooted. His worship connects to specific places, and those places matter because Mesopotamian religion is deeply tied to city identity. A city is not just geography. It is a divine relationship. If Enki is the patron of Eridu, then Eridu is also the social stage where Enki's character is reinforced. Wise, watery, ancient, foundational. You glance at the canal, and you imagine how knowledge travels, not just through stories, but through trade, through scribes copying tablets, through priests moving between cities, through political shifts that elevate one cult center and then another. Enki's influence spreads beyond Eridu, but Eridu remains his mythic home base, the place you picture when you want to feel his oldest presence. Third joke. Small and sleepy. You think about how people today visit the birthplace of some celebrity and take photos like it grants them vibes. Eridu is basically that, except the celebrity is civilization, and the vibes are muddy and extremely serious about irrigation. As you leave the quieter edge of Eridu, you feel like you have stepped into a memory that belongs to more than one era. It is archaeology, yes, but also legend. And Enki, who thrives in hidden depths and slow systems, fits perfectly as the deity of this place. You carry that feeling with you as you head back toward the broader mythic network, because now you are ready for one of Enki's most intriguing roles, the keeper of the me. Those mysterious divine decrees or powers that define civilization itself. You follow the water again, because of course you do, and the night keeps guiding you forward like a steady hand on your shoulder. You keep walking with Eridu's quiet weight still in your chest, like you just left an old library where the air tastes of dust and damp clay. The reeds thin out, the canals straighten, and the cityscape returns in a more organized pattern, the kind that makes you feel civilization snapping back into place. And you start to sense the next layer of Enki's influence, not as a location, not as a personality, but as a system of power that feels almost bureaucratic in the most mystical way possible. Because Enki is tied to something called the me. You let that word sit for a second. Me. It sounds tiny, like it should be about personal feelings. But in Sumerian myth, the me are more like divine decrees, powers, or essential principles that structure civilization and cosmic order. They are the invisible settings that make society run, like the operating system beneath the apps. You cannot see them, but everything behaves according to them. Kingship, priesthood, craftsmanship, truth, music, writing. Even emotional states and social roles show up in lists. The me are the rules and capacities that make humans human in a civilized sense. A mainstream historical fact to anchor you. Sumerian literature includes myths where the me are described as divine ordinances or attributes, and they are associated with Enki as a guardian or custodian. This is a big deal because it positions Enki not only as a wise helper, but as a keeper of civilization's blueprint. He does not just solve problems. He holds the toolkit that defines what solutions are even possible. You walk past a scribal house, and you imagine tablets listing things in neat, careful wedges, roles, rituals, skills, social structures. Ancient Mesopotamia loves lists. Lists of kings, lists of goods, lists of omens, lists of stars. The Mu fit into that cultural obsession with categorizing reality. If you can list it, you can manage it. If you can manage it, you can stabilize it. Enki, as keeper of the me, becomes the god of the list that holds the world together, which sounds boring until you realize your whole life is also held together by invisible lists, like things you must remember and bills that do not pay themselves. First joke. Sleepy. You picture Enki as the original settings menu. Somewhere in the Abzu, there is a divine tablet that says, enable music, enable writing, enable mild panic at 2 a.m. He scrolls through it like, humans are getting too chaotic. Let's reduce impulsive decisions by 3%. It does not work. Obviously. Clay is gonna clay, now. The me are not just abstract. They are stories about how civilization is granted, shared, and sometimes contested. If Enki is the guardian of these powers, it raises questions. Does he distribute them? Does he hoard them? Does he lose them? Does someone steal them? And yes, you can probably feel where this is heading. Because myth loves a heist. But before you get to the heist, you pause in the idea itself. The me suggest that culture is not random. It is divinely structured. That is a worldview that comforts people living in a harsh environment. If the universe has decrees, then chaos is not total. If kingship is a me, then political order is not just brute force. It is cosmic structure. If writing is a me, then scribes are not just nerds with clay. They are participating in divine ordinance. Enki's connection to the me makes him the god who legitimizes civilization's building blocks. That said, the me are weirdly broad. They include things you would not expect to be decrees, like emotions, behaviors, or cultural practices that seem messy. That's part of what makes them fascinating. They blur the line between cosmic law and social custom. They imply that even the chaotic parts of humanity have a place in the grand structure. The universe, in this view, is not a clean spreadsheet. It is a sacred mess with categories. Now, the open, scholarly debate slides in, like a slow current under your feet. Historians still argue how exactly to translate and interpret the me, because they do not map perfectly onto modern concepts like laws, virtues, or institutions. Are they best understood as divine powers objects can carry? Are they decrees that structure reality? Are they cultural templates? The myths themselves sometimes treat them like transferable items, sometimes like abstract principles. The ambiguity might be part of the point. A civilization's essence is hard to pin down, and the me are an attempt to pin it down without fully succeeding. You step into a small temple forecourt where a carved stone shows a figure seated with water flowing in stylized lines. You cannot help but imagine Enki as a librarian of civilization, guarding the shelf where writing sits next to kingship and lamentation sits next to joy. It feels both profound and slightly hilarious, because it suggests the gods have to manage human complexity the way you manage a cluttered room. You do not throw everything away. You label it. You stack it. You hope it behaves. Oh, second joke. Gentle. You imagine Inanna, later, bursting in like, "I'm here for the me." And Enki is like, "Which ones?" And she says, "Yes." Enki sighs, already regretting the inventory system. Now for the quirky tidbit, slightly off the main road. Some modern thinkers compare the me to archetypal patterns or mimetic structures, like the blueprints that keep cultures repeating certain forms across time. That is not a direct ancient claim. Of course, it is modern theory layered onto ancient myth, but it can be a useful lens. The me as early recognition that culture has components, that societies run on shared scripts. Enki, in that lens, becomes the keeper of shared scripts, the god of how we do things. You feel the night deepen, and you feel Enki's calm again in the concept of custody. Someone has to hold the world's instructions. Someone has to maintain the logic of civilization. It is not flashy work. It is foundational work. The Abzu is hidden water. The me are hidden structures. Enki keeps hidden things that support visible life. That is his pattern. You glance at your hands, and you imagine them holding a clay tablet. A tablet is fragile when wet, durable when fired. Culture is similar. It can be reshaped when young, hardened when established. Enki's role with the me suggests he participates in that hardening process. He helps society become stable enough to persist. Third joke. Soft and sleepy. You think, if the me include procrastination, then Enki definitely forgot to lock that one away. Or maybe he tried. But humans invented a new version. We are very talented like that. As you step out of the forecourt, you can feel the next story pulling you like a tide. Because if Enki holds these divine ordinances, then someone will want them. And if someone wants them, there will be negotiation, celebration, maybe even a little too much drinking. And then a sudden realization that a god gave away the keys to civilization while feeling generous. You follow the canal again, letting the night carry you forward, and you can practically hear laughter echoing ahead. The kind of laughter that sounds fun right until it becomes a problem. You follow the canal toward the warmer sound of human life. Because even at night, a city has pockets of wakefulness, little lantern-lit bubbles where someone is still talking, still cooking, still refusing to go to bed, like sleep is an optional subscription. The laughter you heard grows clearer, and it has that particular bounce that means someone is celebrating. Someone is winning, or someone has found a jar of beer and decided it counts as a personality. You round a corner into a courtyard strung with simple lamps, and the air smells like sweet dates, roasted grain, and that fermented tang of ancient beer. People sit in loose circles, hands gesturing slowly, voices relaxed. A musician plucks a few notes that drift into the night like soft ripples. This scene feels perfect for Enki, because he is not only the god of deep wisdom, he is also a god who understands that civilization is not built on rules alone. It is built on gatherings, on stories, on shared rituals, on the occasional party that makes everyone forget their fear for a little while. And here, sliding in as naturally as a guest who knows they can get away with anything, comes Inanna. Inanna is a major Sumerian goddess associated with love, sex, power, and war. And she is famous for being bold, ambitious, and relentless. A mainstream historical fact to anchor you. Inanna appears prominently in Sumerian literature, and one of her well-known myth cycles involves her traveling to different places to consolidate power and prestige. When she steps into a story, the temperature changes. It is like someone opened a door and let in a gust of perfume and consequence. Tonight, you are inside a myth that feels almost like a divine cautionary tale about generosity, pride, and the hazards of drinking when you are in charge of reality's settings menu. This is the story where Inanna visits Enki and ends up receiving the me, those divine ordinances that shape civilization. You already know what the me are from your last walk. Now you get to watch what happens when the keeper of the me meets someone who is very good at taking things. You picture Enki in his element, calm, confident, maybe a little too pleased with his own hospitality. He welcomes Inanna. There is feasting, there is drinking, there is the warm glow of divine politeness that hides sharp intentions. Inanna is charming, and Enki is generous, and the night is long. You can almost hear the clink of cups, the low hum of conversation, the moment when a celebration shifts from respectful to slightly unwise. First joke, sleepy and gentle. You realize this is the oldest story of I was feeling generous and now I regret everything, ever recorded. Enki is basically the divine version of you ordering something online at 2 a.m. and waking up like, why did I buy a ceremonial lion statue and 300 reeds? In many tellings of the myth, Enki, in a state of intoxication or at least festive looseness, offers Inanna a series of the May. He gives them away as gifts, each one a piece of civilization's blueprint. Inanna accepts, of course, and she does not accept timidly. She collects them with focus, like someone who came with a plan and is watching the plan unfold perfectly. Then she leaves quickly, taking the me back to her city, often associated with Uruk, where they will enhance her prestige and power. You can feel the story's energy shift right there, from cozy celebration to sudden consequences. Enki sobers up, or at least the myth makes him realize what happened. He discovers the me are gone, and you can almost hear the quiet horror of a librarian realizing someone checked out the entire civilization shelf and did not return it. Second joke. Soft. You imagine Enki blinking at an empty tablet rack and saying, very calmly, "Okay, who took the concept of kingship?" And a servant whispers, "Inanna." And Enki, still trying to be polite, says, "Of course she did." Now, the story does not just end with Inanna running away, giggling. Enki reacts. He sends beings, or messengers, to retrieve the me, trying to intercept Inanna's boat as it travels. There are attempts, counter-attempts, a kind of divine chase scene that is weirdly polite compared to modern action movies. No explosions, just clever obstacles and reversals. Inanna, being Inanna, does not fold. She keeps the me. She outmaneuvers the retrieval attempts, and by the end, the transfer stands. This myth is more than a fun tale about a tipsy god making a bad decision. It is a story about how cultural power can shift between cities, how prestige can be contested, and how civilization itself is imagined as something that can be possessed, moved, and displayed. Enki as keeper of the me represents an older, foundational authority. Inanna receiving the me represents rising power, ambition, and the energy of a city that wants to be central. Historians still argue whether this myth should be read primarily as a political allegory about the shifting influence of cult centers like Eridu and Uruk, or as a moral and theological story about the distribution of divine gifts and the inevitability of change. In other words, is it basically ancient propaganda dressed as divine comedy, Or is it a deeper reflection on how civilization is not fixed, how it migrates, how it spreads, how it cannot stay locked in one place forever? The story can hold both readings at once, which is part of why it feels so alive. You stand in the courtyard, listening to laughter fade into quieter talk. And you imagine the moment Inanna steps onto her boat with the me secured, her eyes bright with victory. You do not see a villain. You see a force. Inanna does not steal in the petty sense. She consolidates. She claims. She proves herself. And Enki, for all his wisdom, allows this to happen, whether through intoxication, hospitality, or some deeper recognition that civilization's gifts should not be hoarded. That last possibility is where the story gets interesting. Because Enki is wise, really wise. So you start wondering, did he truly mess up, or did he let it happen? The myth plays it like a blunder, but myths love layers. Enki is the god who uses indirect methods and strategic loopholes. It is not impossible that the story is showing a controlled release of power disguised as a party accident. You can feel that ambiguity humming beneath the surface, like water under a sealed jar. Here comes the quirky tidbit. Just a little sideways. Some readers note how the myth frames knowledge and cultural authority as transferable, almost like intellectual property. The me behave like portable assets, and the story becomes an early meditation on who gets to define civilization standards. That is not a claim the Sumerians would phrase in modern terms, but the pattern is there. Skills and institutions belong to communities, but communities compete. The myth tells that truth through divine characters, making the stakes cosmic so the human stakes feel justified. Third joke. Sleepy and kind. You picture Enki creating a new tablet labeled Me, learn from mistakes. Then pausing and realizing he accidentally gave that one away too. You walk out of the courtyard and let the night cool your face again. You feel Enki's personality more clearly now. He is not only calm genius, he's also vulnerable to the social texture of his own domain. He values hospitality. He values exchange. He enjoys celebration. And sometimes, that openness creates consequences he has to manage. This is Enki as a real mythic personality. Wise, generous, occasionally too relaxed, then quickly back to being the one who tries to stabilize the outcome. Inanna's side of the story also teaches you something about Mesopotamian myth logic. Power is not static. It moves. It can be won. It can be granted. It can be taken through charisma and strategy. Civilization itself, those me that define what society is, becomes a prize and a responsibility. Inanna does not just take the me to decorate her throne. She takes them to animate her city, to make Uruk shine with the full spectrum of human culture, messy and magnificent. You keep walking, and the canal's whisper returns, steady and forgiving. You feel the story's aftertaste, that mix of humor and weight. You think about Enki as the keeper who sometimes lets go, and Inanna as the force who sometimes grabs. Between them, civilization spreads. It leaves one center and strengthens another. It refuses to stay still. And as you drift onward, you feel the next theme waiting. Because once you talk about the me and the distribution of cultural power, it naturally leads into Enki's broader associations with ritual expertise, healing knowledge, and protective magic. The practical side of wisdom, the kind you want on a normal day, not just in a cosmic heist. You follow the canal into quieter streets again, and the night holds you gently, like water holding a boat that has already stolen the future. You drift away from the laughter and the lamps, back into streets that feel more private, where the night presses close and the city's breath is soft and slow. The canal keeps you company like it always does, a quiet line of moving water that makes everything feel less sharp. After the Inanna story, you can still taste the sweetness of celebration, but you also feel the deeper theme underneath it. Knowledge moves, power shifts, and the stuff that keeps humans safe is never just muscles and walls. It is know-how. It is ritual. It is medicine. It is the right words at the right time. This is where Enki's wisdom becomes less like a cosmic concept and more like a daily toolkit, the kind you would want in your pocket if your world is full of unpredictable illness, bad luck, and the occasional "why is the sky doing that" moment. Enki is tied to magic, incantations, purification, and protective knowledge in many Mesopotamian traditions. The calm in his character suddenly makes even more sense. Because if your job is to untangle invisible threats, you cannot afford to panic. You have to be steady. You have to be precise. A mainstream historical fact to anchor you. Mesopotamian cultures developed extensive traditions of healing and protective rituals, including written incantations and medical texts preserved on clay tablets. And these practices often blended what we would call medicine and magic. There was no hard wall between prescribing an herb and reciting an incantation. Both were part of treating the whole situation. Enki's association with wisdom and the Abzu positions him naturally within this world of sacred technique. If knowledge is power, then healing is power that matters every day. You pass a small doorway where a lamp burns low, and you hear a murmur inside, a steady chant that rises and falls like waves. You do not barge in. You just listen. The voice is calm, measured, as if the speaker is laying a blanket over something frightened. You imagine a healer or ritual specialist, someone trained in the right words and gestures, working to protect a household from illness or misfortune. In this environment, a deity like Enki is not just an abstract symbol. He is a patron of expertise, the divine backing behind the person who knows what to do when everyone else is scared. First joke, sleepy and gentle. You realize that in ancient Mesopotamia, the doctor and the exorcist might basically be co-workers, and their shared office supplies include clay tablets, herbs, and a deep personal hatred of whatever demon is ruining your weekend. Enki is the supervisor who approves the treatment plan. You move on, and you picture how water functions here too. Not only as drinking water, not only as irrigation, but as purification. Washing hands, sprinkling water, pouring water in ritual contexts. Water resets, water cleans. Water marks a boundary between polluted and purified, between danger and safety. Enki, Lord of sweet waters, becomes the god you invoke when you want cleansing that is not just physical, but spiritual. The Abzu, that hidden freshwater deep, becomes the mythic source of purity, the place where cleansing originates. You pause at a public basin, and the water is still, reflecting a faint star. Someone has carved a simple pattern around the rim. You dip your fingers and imagine the sensation of rinsing away fear. Even if you do not believe in spirits, you can understand the psychology. Ritual gives you structure when life is chaotic. It gives you steps. It gives you language. It gives you a way to act instead of helplessly waiting. Enki's realm is full of that kind of actionable calm. And now, the open, scholarly debate slides in, like a quiet question you cannot fully answer. Historians still argue about how to describe Mesopotamian magic without imposing modern assumptions, because these practices are not fringe superstition inside their culture. They are part of official learned tradition, preserved by specialists and tied to temples and scribal schools. To call it magic can mislead, but to call it science is also misleading. It is its own category, a structured system of knowledge that aims to influence health, fate, and protection through a blend of material and symbolic means. Enki sits comfortably in that category because he embodies technique, wisdom, and hidden power. Now for the quirky tidbit, just a little sideways. Some traditions and interpretations connect Enki's wisdom with the idea that names have power. In Mesopotamian thought, knowing the correct name of a god, a demon, a ritual, a disease, could be part of controlling it. That is why incantations matter. Words matter. Enki, as a deity of knowledge, becomes the god who knows the names, the formulas, the hidden structures behind visible symptoms. Again, it is not modern biology, but it is a sophisticated recognition that language can shape experience, especially when you are frightened. Second joke. Soft. You imagine Enki's sacred book of names like a giant contact list. Demon of toothache. Blocked. Spirit of nightmares. Muted. Random bad luck. Reported. If only... Right? You keep walking and think about how specialists would have been trained. Scribes copying lists of signs, lists of omens, lists of ritual steps. Apprentices learning how to prepare ingredients, how to time actions, how to speak the words precisely. It is all very Enki, knowledge as a craft, wisdom as something you practice, not something you merely feel. That is why his calm is so steady. It is trained calm. It is the calm of someone who has done this 1,000 times. You hear a child cough behind a wall. A mother shushes softly. You feel the ache of vulnerability that makes healing traditions so important. In a world with limited medical tools, you would cling to any system that offers hope, even if part of that system is symbolic. Enki's association with protective knowledge makes him a comfort figure, a god you might appeal to not for dramatic miracles, but for steady safeguarding, for the right treatment, for the right ritual, for the right chance. You also notice how this connects back to the me. If the me include the institutions of civilization, then healing and ritual expertise are part of that civilizing project. Protection is a cornerstone of social stability. A city full of sickness and fear is unstable. A city with trained specialists who can respond to crises is stronger. Enki's wisdom supports the infrastructure of safety, not just the infrastructure of water. Third joke, quiet and sleepy. You realize Enki is basically the god of read the instructions, and ancient people really did. They wrote them on clay. You can almost hear Enki saying, "Please stop improvising. I gave you a perfectly good incantation for this." As the night deepens, you feel that your beginner understanding of Enki is becoming more complete. He is not a distant sky god. He is in the water you wash with, the words you speak for protection, the craft knowledge that turns fear into action. He is the patron of people who do quiet work, the ones who keep households safe without fanfare. And now, because you have touched Enki's healing and ritual side, you are ready to step into the messy, human-feeling web of his relationships. Mythology loves family drama because it is the easiest way to make cosmic forces relatable. Enki's family ties, his divine connections, the way stories use kinship to map power and consequence. That is where you go next. You keep walking, letting the chant behind you fade into silence, and the canal's whisper becomes your guide again, steady as a heartbeat, carrying you into the next set of names and bonds. You keep drifting through the sleeping city, and the quiet now feels more personal, like the streets are thin corridors between people's dreams. The canal stays beside you, of course, because Enki's stories always seem to have water nearby, like he refuses to appear without his favorite mood lighting. The air is cool enough to make you tuck your hands closer to yourself, and you start to sense the next layer of myth settling in. Family. Because in Mesopotamian mythology, gods do not just represent forces. They are related. They marry. They feud. They cooperate. They blame each other for problems. And honestly, they do it with the same emotional logic as humans. Except the consequences are cosmic. Family ties become a way to map the universe. If you want to understand why something happens, you look at who is connected to whom, who owes whom, who resents whom, and who is trying to keep the whole thing from falling apart. Enki's relationships are especially important because he sits at the crossroads of so many themes: creation, wisdom, magic, water, and the survival of humans. His family links often place him inside divine drama that explains why he acts the way he does. If he is the calm problem solver, family is the reason he's always solving problems in the first place. A mainstream historical fact to anchor you. Mesopotamian pantheons include complex genealogies and shifting relationships, and deities like Enki appear with different familial connections across different texts and periods. That means there is not one clean family tree you can memorize and be done with it. There are overlapping traditions. There are regional variations. There are later reinterpretations. The gods' relationships are as fluid as the rivers, which feels fitting for Enki. Honestly, you walk past a low shrine where someone has left a tiny figurine, maybe a protective charm. It makes you think about how people in the city would have felt surrounded by divine personalities. Not distant, abstract ones, but a whole divine neighborhood with history and gossip. In that neighborhood, Enki often appears as a fatherly figure, a source of wisdom, and in some stories, a creator or procreator whose actions ripple outward. In various traditions, Enki is connected to other divine figures through parentage, consorts, or offspring. He is often associated with Damgalnuna or Ninhursag, depending on the tradition, and those names carry their own weight. Ninhursag, for example, is often linked to earth and fertility themes. When Enki is paired or entangled with fertility and earth figures, it reinforces that creation motif you already felt: water and earth working together. Sweet water meets fertile ground. Life happens. Civilization grows. First joke: sleepy and armless. You realize divine families are basically like regular families, except instead of who ate my leftovers, it is who accidentally created a cosmic imbalance and now the crops are failing. Enki is the one in the kitchen at midnight making a snack and also quietly repairing the universe. But family drama in these myths can get weird fast. Not in a graphic way, just in a myth-logic way. There are stories where Enki's relationships lead to consequences that require healing, negotiation, or divine intervention. You do not need every detail tonight, but you can feel the pattern. Enki's power is creative and expansive, and that expansiveness sometimes creates problems. When the gods create, they also complicate. When they love, they also entangle. And then someone has to solve the entanglement. Often, that someone is Enki himself, which is either ironic or exactly what you expect at this point. You pass a courtyard where a couple of older women are whispering, and you cannot make out the words, but you can feel that family talk energy, the kind that carries both affection and complaint. Myths often use that energy to make the divine world feel familiar. Enki might be wise, but he is also a participant in messy dynamics. That makes him relatable. It makes him believable. It makes his calm feel earned rather than automatic. Now the open scholarly debate slides in, because of course it does. Historians still argue how to interpret divine genealogies in Mesopotamian mythology. Are they meant as literal religious family structures? Or are they symbolic maps of how natural forces and political powers relate? When Enki is linked to an earth goddess, is that because people believed in a divine marriage, or because they were expressing an agricultural truth? Water and earth together produce fertility. The answer can be both, and the ambiguity is part of the myth's strength. It lets one story carry multiple meanings at once. Now for a quirky tidbit, lightly fringe but not outrageous, some comparative mythology. Enthusiasts point out that Enki's pattern, wise father figure, creative force, occasional boundary bender, resembles archetypes found across cultures, like trickster-creator hybrids. This can be helpful for modern understanding, but it can also flatten the unique Mesopotamian context if you push it too far. Still, it is interesting to notice how often human minds imagine a clever creator who is not purely righteous and not purely chaotic, but a mix. Because that mix feels like reality. Second joke. Soft. You imagine Enki trying to host a family gathering in the Abzu. He lays out snacks, sets out fresh water, and says, "Let's keep it peaceful." 10 minutes later, someone is arguing about kingship, someone is stealing decrees, and someone is threatening a flood. Enki just closes his eyes, like, "I knew I should have muted this." You keep walking, and you notice how these relationships connect to everything you have learned. The tension with Enlil becomes more vivid if you imagine them as part of a divine hierarchy, with kinship bonds and rivalries. The flood story becomes more intense if you imagine Enki not just as a random helper, but as someone who feels responsible for humanity's existence because of his role in creation. The me story becomes more personal if you imagine the transfer of civilization's decrees not just as politics, but as the drama of who gets to hold cultural authority in the divine family. Enki's relationships also connect to his role as a healer. Family conflict produces imbalance. Imbalance produces suffering. Healing restores order. Enki's wisdom is the thread that ties the family drama back into stability. Like a person who keeps the peace not because they are naturally calm, but because they have seen what happens when nobody is calm. Third joke. Sleepy. You realize Enki would be the one who brings a notepad to family arguments. Everyone else is shouting. Enki is like, "Okay, I'm writing down action items." That is the most terrifying kind of competence. As you move through the night, you let yourself hold a beginner-friendly way of seeing these divine relationships. They are story tools. They make cosmic forces human. They give you a way to feel why Enki intervenes, why he negotiates, why he bends rules. Family gives the universe emotional stakes. And now, because you have tasted the family web, you are ready for the next movement. How Enki changes across time, across languages, across empires. How Enki becomes Ii. How stories shift as cultures blend. How a god's identity can remain recognizable while still adapting. That is the next calm fact you gather. That these myths are not frozen. They travel. You keep walking with the canal's hush in your ears, and it feels like history itself is flowing beside you, carrying names downstream, changing their shapes, but never losing the taste of sweet water. You keep moving, and the night starts to feel like a long river journey in itself. The kind where you pass through different landscapes without ever leaving the water's presence. The streets change. The architecture shifts slightly. The language you overhear in the distance feels different in rhythm, different in texture, like the city's tongue has learned new consonants over the centuries. And you realize you're walking not just through space, but through time. Because Enki's story does not stay neatly in one era. It travels. Enki begins in the Sumerian world with a name that tastes like earth and water. But as cultures mix and empires rise, he is increasingly identified with the Akkadian name Ea. You have already felt this a bit. Now you feel it more clearly as a historical phenomenon. Mesopotamia is not a single civilization frozen in one moment. It is layers: Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian, and more, stacked like clay bricks. The gods, like everything else, move through those layers, a mainstream historical fact to anchor you. As Akkadian and later Babylonian cultures absorbed and reinterpreted Sumerian traditions, many deities were syncretized or equated across languages, and Enki is commonly identified with Ea in Akkadian contexts, preserving many core associations with water, wisdom, and magical knowledge. This is one of the easiest ways to understand Mesopotamian religion. It evolves through continuity and reinterpretation, not through clean replacement. The old gods do not just vanish. They get translated, reframed, and sometimes promoted or demoted depending on who is in charge. You walk along a wider processional street, and you imagine scribes copying older Sumerian hymns into Akkadian forms, translating not only words but concepts. In that act, Enki becomes Ea, but he does not become someone else entirely. He remains the watery wise one, the patron of incantations and protective knowledge, the figure who can soften harsh decrees. The name changes, the emphasis shifts, but the core flavor stays recognizable. First joke. Sleepy. You realize Enki is basically the ancient version of a celebrity with multiple stage names. I was Enki in my early career. Then I rebranded as Ea for a wider audience. Same vibe, new label, merch updated. As you keep walking, you sense that some traits become more pronounced in certain periods. In later Babylonian contexts, Ea's role in wisdom and magic becomes deeply important in learned traditions, especially in the world of scribes and ritual specialists. When power becomes more centralized, when empires need standardized knowledge and ritual control, a god tied to deep, written expertise becomes even more valuable. Enki, or Ea, becomes a stable pillar in the learned religious ecosystem, a divine sponsor for the people whose job is to keep the cosmos from getting glitchy. But the mythic landscape also changes around him. Other gods rise in prominence, especially Marduk in Babylonian tradition. This matters because divine hierarchies often reflect political hierarchies. When a city becomes dominant, its patron god gains prestige. That does not erase Enki, but it can shift his role. He might become more like the wise elder, the counselor figure whose knowledge empowers newer central deities. You can almost see the political translation. The older cultural authority is respected. But the current power gets the main spotlight. Historians still argue how much of these shifts in divine status reflect real theological change in popular belief versus elite scribal editing and political influence. Did ordinary people's devotion move as quickly as official texts suggest? Or did older patterns persist in daily practice even as imperial ideology promoted certain gods? The debate matters because it reminds you the myths you read are often the surviving texts, and surviving texts are shaped by those with the resources to preserve them. You pause by a wall where an old relief has been patched with newer brick. The visual feels like the whole point. Culture repairs itself with new layers. It does not always demolish the old. Enki's persistence across periods shows that certain divine functions are too useful to lose. Fresh water does not stop being essential. Wisdom does not stop being essential. Protective knowledge does not stop being essential. So Enki, or Ea, remains. Now for a quirky tidbit, a little off to the side. Modern audiences sometimes treat Enki and Anunnaki as if they belong to one fixed, monolithic myth system. But ancient Mesopotamian religion is more like a set of evolving traditions with overlapping categories and shifting group names. The Anunnaki, for example, appear in various contexts as a collective of deities, sometimes tied to the underworld or to divine assemblies. Depending on the text, Enki is connected to divine assemblies too, but his identity is not confined to any single modern label. This matters because it helps you resist the internet temptation to turn a complex tradition into a neat lore Bible. The ancient world rarely gives you one canon. Second joke. Soft. You imagine a modern fandom trying to make a definitive timeline. Enki is like, good luck. The scribes are like, we already made 10 versions. And the clay tablets are like, I'm just here to survive being dropped. You keep walking through time. You imagine the way stories travel along trade routes, along diplomatic marriages, along scribal schools. You imagine myths being recited in new dialects, adapted to new audiences, shaped by new anxieties. A flood story might gain new details. A creation motif might be emphasized differently. A god's title might expand. The core remains, but the costume changes. Enki's flexibility is part of why he survives these shifts. He is not only a city patron, he is a concept, freshwater wisdom, technique, protective knowledge. Concepts survive political upheaval better than local branding, because concepts attach to basic human needs. No empire lasts forever, but everyone still needs water, healing, and a way to make sense of misfortune. Third joke, sleepy. You think Enki is basically the one god who stays relevant because his domain is the stuff you can't ignore. Water, knowledge, solutions. If you tried to cancel him, your crops would cancel you back. As you near the end of this time walk, you feel the beginner guide coming into focus. You started with riverbank calm and a name. You learned symbols. You sank into the Abzu. You met the calm genius and the benevolent trickster. You touched creation clay. You heard the flood whisper. You felt tension with Enlil. You visited Eridu. You handled the me. You watched Inanna's power move. You listened to healing chants. You peeked at divine family drama. And now you have watched Enki travel across cultures, becoming E, adapting without vanishing. The next step is gentle and satisfying, gathering your 7 calm facts like smooth stones, placing them in your palm, one by one. So when you wake up tomorrow and someone says, wait, who is Enki again? You can answer without panic. You follow the canal one last time into a quieter street, where the night feels almost done with you in a kind way, and you let everything you have learned settle into a simple rhythm. You keep walking. But now it feels like you are walking inside your own memory, like the city and the river have gently moved from place into thought. The night is softer, the lamps are fewer, the canal's whisper is slower, like it is trying to match your breathing. And you can feel it is time to gather what you have learned. Not in a rushed recap, but in the calm way you pick up smooth stones from a riverbank and line them up in your palm, each one simple, cool, and reassuring. So you do it. You gather your 7 calm facts about Enki, beginner-friendly, not overloaded, and you let them settle into a steady rhythm. Fact 1. Enki is a major Mesopotamian god of sweet water and wisdom, not salty sea chaos, not thunderous sky command, but fresh water that sustains life and the knowledge that makes life workable. When you picture him, you picture clear water rising from beneath the earth, and a mind that stays cool even when the world is overheating. Fact 2. Enki's home is tied to the Abzu, the underground freshwater, deep. This is the hidden reservoir beneath the surface, the mythic place where purity and life-supporting water originate. The Abzu is why Enki feels foundational. He's not a god you have to look up to find. He's under your feet, in springs and wells, and the quiet concept that unseen support systems keep everything alive. Fact 3. Enki is the calm problem solver in many myths. He does not always rule by command. He often rules by understanding. He appears when situations need intelligence, technique, and a workaround. If other gods are shouting, Enki is the one who lowers his voice and makes everyone listen. Fact 4. Enki can be a benevolent trickster, bending rules to protect life. His cleverness is water-like. It flows around obstacles rather than smashing them. He finds loopholes, indirect methods, quiet interventions. This is not chaos for fun. It is adaptability in the service of survival. Fact 5. Enki is linked to creation motifs involving clay and water. Humans being shaped from a clay is a recurring Mesopotamian theme. And Enki's elements, sweet water and earth, are the literal materials of both myth and civilization. Clay tablets hold the stories. Clay bricks build the cities. The myth and the daily world mirror each other. Fact 6. In flood traditions, Enki is remembered as the quiet helper. When a divine decision leans toward total destruction, Enki becomes the whisper, the indirect warning, the plan that preserves life. He is the god of continuity, the one who insists the story must go on. Fact 7. Enki's identity travels across cultures, often becoming Ea in Akkadian and Babylonian contexts. The name changes. The emphasis shifts with politics and language. But the core functions persist: wisdom, water, protective knowledge, and the ability to stabilize a world that constantly threatens to slip into chaos. You let those 7 facts sit. They do not clash. They fit together like stones arranged along a canal ledge, each supporting the next. And then, because you are not a machine made only of facts, you let the stories wrap around them again, soft and warm, the way a blanket wraps around a body that finally decides it can rest. You remember the symbols, the watery streams, the fish in the flow, the goatfish emblem that still makes your brain blink like, really? Yes, really. Myth does not care if you think it is weird. It cares if it works. And that symbol works because it carries Enki's in-between nature, land and water, stability and change, seriousness and a little cosmic mischief. First joke? Sleepy. You imagine explaining the goatfish to a modern friend. They stare. You say, "Look, it's ancient. They were experimenting." Your friend says, "With what?" You say, "With reality." They slowly back away. Enki smiles somewhere in the Abzu. You remember Eridu, that damp, ancient mood of beginnings. The idea that a city can become a mythic ancestor, the place where people imagine civilization taking its first organized breath. Enki fits there because he is not just a god of worship. He is a god of infrastructure, water management, knowledge preservation, ritual practice, the quiet systems that make living together possible. You remember the me, those divine ordinances that feel like a cosmic settings menu. And you remember Inanna's bold visit, the celebration, the transfer, the chase. That story makes you realize civilization is not static. It moves. It is contested. It is shared, stolen, granted, shifted, and recentered over time. Enki as keeper of the me is the wisdom of the old foundation. Inanna taking the me is the energy of new power. and the world keeps going, because the me end up in circulation, shaping cities beyond the original source. Second joke. Soft. You picture Enki putting sticky notes on the me after that incident. Do not give away. Seriously. Not even if she asks nicely. It will not matter. Inanna does not read sticky notes. She is the sticky note. You remember the healing chants, the protective rituals, the way Mesopotamian practice blends what you might call medicine and magic. Enki lives there too. He is the patron of specialists, of those who memorize, record, and perform the right steps to protect households from the unseen. In that sense, Enki's calm is not abstract. It is the calm of someone who has done the work, who knows the method, who trusts the process. And then you remember Enlil, the wind of authority, the strictness of decree, the feeling that the universe needs a backbone as well as a heart. Enki's tension with Enlil is not just drama. It is the mythic expression of a truth you know in your bones. A world without rules collapses, but a world with only rules becomes cruel. Enki is the soft intelligence that keeps order from turning into erasure. Historians still argue whether these myths are best read as political reflections of city-state rivalries and shifting cult prestige, or as deeper theological attempts to explain nature, society, and morality through narrative. And you let that argument stay open, because you do not need to solve it to feel the story's power. You only need to understand that myths carry multiple layers at once: memory, ideology, psychology, poetry, and practical life. Third joke, sits sleepy and kind. You realize you have basically just taken a beginner course in ancient divine office politics, and Enki is still the employee you would most want on your team, not because he is perfect, but because he can fix things. And now the pacing slows. Because the night is doing what it does. Your mind starts to soften at the edges. The river sound becomes less like information and more like comfort. You feel the city's outlines blur, not because the story is ending abruptly, but because you have reached the part where understanding becomes a quiet weight, something you can carry without gripping it too tightly. You imagine Enki again, not as a distant figure on a throne, but as a presence in the water itself. Sweet water rising, cool and steady, a hand guiding a canal gate, a whisper that becomes a plan, a tablet drying in the night air, holding knowledge for someone who has not even been born yet. You imagine the Abzu beneath everything, patient and silent, and you feel how comforting it is to think that beneath the chaos of the surface there might be something stable, something wise, something that remembers how to keep life going. The streets around you grow quieter. The lamps dim. The stars seem to press closer, as if the sky is leaning in to listen. Your breathing slows without you forcing it. Your shoulders drop. Your thoughts drift like leaves on dark water. And in that drifting, you let the 7 facts become simple again. Water, wisdom, Abzu, calm solutions, gentle trickery, clay creation, flood mercy, a name that travels and changes but never loses its core. You do not have to hold more than that. You can let the rest float, because the river will remember it for you. Now the wind down settles fully, like a warm blanket. The world feels less sharp, less demanding. The canal's whisper becomes a lullaby. You picture the ancient riverbank from the start, reeds brushing together softly, mud brick walls holding day heat like a slow pulse. And you feel yourself easing back from the myth into the comfort of the present. You are safe here. You are not being chased by divine decrees. You are not building a boat overnight. You are just listening, breathing, letting old stories wash over you like cool water over tired hands. And if your mind tries to grab onto one more detail, you gently let it go, like letting a pebble fall back into the river with a soft plunk. The city fades. The river remains. The Abzu hums beneath the earth, quiet and steady. And somewhere in that calm depth, Enki's wisdom feels less like a lesson and more like a simple reassurance. There is always a way through, even if it is indirect, even if it is quiet, even if it is found by listening instead of shouting. Your eyelids feel heavier. The night is kind. The water keeps moving, and you do not have to do anything but rest. End of script. Sweet dream.